So yes, we're here on the Jagd und Hund. It's the last day. It's not so busy anymore. And my today's guest is Professor Edson Gandiwa from ZimParks in Zimbabwe. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to have me here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
What are we talking about today? What do you want to talk about? I heard that we're going to talk about conservation.
Yes, so today I will just introduce you to wildlife conservation in Zimbabwe.
Yes.
I know in earlier podcast with Tinashe Farao, he touched on issues of hunting, conservation, and key topical issues in Zimbabwe.
Yes, sounds very good. How does the conservation in Zimbabwe differ to other countries?
So Zimbabwe, we practice what we call sustainable wildlife conservation.
Yes.
In that regard, we manage as per the mandate we are given with the Parks and Wildlife Act and other provisions within the broader legislative focus for Zimbabwe. We manage wildlife to ensure that we sustain it today and derive benefits, whilst we also make sure that the future generations are going to derive the same benefits today. To do so, in Zimbabwe, we manage wildlife basically in three forms. That is on state land, which mostly the Parks and Wildlife Estate, and also including gazetted forests, which are administered by the Forestry Commission. Secondly, we have private land, who does private conservation. And lastly, we have the community-based natural resource management program, CAMFIRE, which are in the communal area. So those basically the land forms that we have under management of wildlife. And that, to us, gives us an opportunity to be able to really focus on the diverse ecosystems we have. Just to highlight, in Zimbabwe, almost 28% of the land is under conservation. And Zimbabwe is an area of around 390,000 square kilometers. So which means almost 100,000 square kilometers are under some form of conservation, which is quite a big achievement to date.
Does the sustainable use of habitat also belong to the conservation of animals? Like, is it on the same point, or is the same importance?
It does. So when we manage wildlife, mostly when we talk about wild animals, they occur in the natural habitat. Mm-hmm. So in our case, we have 5 ecological regions. Of course, now we have added another ecological region due to the varying climate and the climate change we are observing globally. So in that regard, when we say wildlife, to us it occurs, we are referring to wild animals, but also the plants. So we look at the fauna and flora. So when we say sustainable, we are saying in as much as we utilize the wildlife, one of the main forms is trophy hunting, which is sustainable utilization, which to us is, let me just highlight that we have over 270 mammal species.
Okay.
But in terms of utilization, we only give quotas to just around 30 mammal species, and then we have some reptiles and birds.
How many? You said how many species you have, but how many animals are we actually talking about in Zimbabwe that are able to be, for example, hunted? Like you said 13 species, but how many animals in total are we talking about?
So I said the mammal species we have is about around 270. That is from inventories. And so in terms of utilization, we only give quotas to a maximum of 30 mammal species. And what we do is that we set quotas. And when we set quotas, we are using a variety of factors. So the first would be the population of the animals. We also look at the management regime that is occurring there, the changes in dynamics that are happening. That will help us to understand the number that is sustainably used. And we also have a maximum sustainable limit. Normally, we don't give quotas to that are beyond the natural growth rate of the species. So in terms of numbers, they are variable. So if you look at the main species that we utilize, elephants, we have a CITES limit of about 500. Then we have the buffalo, we normally use the maximum growth rate. Then for lions, it's the same. We also use an age-based estimation in terms of deriving our quotas. And then for the other key species, mostly it's the maximum growth rate, but also compounded with other factors. So that allows us to be able to ensure that we are not having an off-take which is actually detrimental to our population. But CITES is some controls in terms of the numbers that are utilized. I talked about 500 for elephants. Then we have also leopard, which is about 500. Crocodile, we have 200. And then For cheetah, we have a cap of 50, but we are not utilizing cheetah because it's adaptive management approach. So in terms of numbers, they are variable.
What is adaptive management approach? Can you talk about that?
So adaptive management approach in our case refers to the fact that we use science. ZimParks, all our conservation in Zimbabwe is science-based. So we use science to help us ensure that our decision matrix changes based on information that we are deriving. So if it's quota or habitat, as you had indicated earlier. So for us, we look at what are the dynamics. Are population changing? Are they growing or they are going down? If they are going down, it means that our quota will be reduced. And if there is an upward movement in terms of increase, we may then say to some extent we may adjust based on evidence. So adaptive management is a system which we use to say our decision and actions change year to year based on science information that is coming and how we are going to manage habitat or even the numbers.
Edson, do you have some numbers that we can prove, for example, the rise in the population of the species? Can you give us some numbers and actually, what happened over the last years?
Thank you very much. So for numbers, I will talk about first the elephant. So Zimbabwe over the years has seen an increase in elephants. And I'm sure earlier discussion with Tinashe, you mentioned that we have around 100,000 elephants.
Yes.
So for elephants, just for instance, last year we published the CASA, or one of the TFCs in Zimbabwe, the Kavango Zambezi Transplanter Conservation Area. We had the first area survey combining the 5 countries. So for Zimbabwe, in the last survey for that region was in 2014. Mm-hmm. And in 2014, we had around
10 years ago.
Yes, we had around 53,000 elephants. That is in the Northwest Matabeleland region. So the last 2022 year survey, we had around 65,000 elephants.
Yeah.
Already showing an increase. And this is the same pattern with even the southeast lowveld of Zimbabwe, where we have seen over the years a natural increase of elephants. Then we look at beyond elephants. If you look at buffaloes, we have been maintaining a constant growth of buffaloes in Zimbabwe. Rhinos, in 2022, we surpassed the 1,000 rhino mark, which has given Zimbabwe the 4th, in terms of our ranking in terms of rhino conservation. So overall, in keystone species management, Zimbabwe has been doing very well. And the numbers, based on science, are telling us of that upward trajectory. The same with carnivores. In the regions where we are doing, in areas where we have, very active management, we are actually witnessing a substantial, increase in terms of density of our carnivores.
It is very interesting what you're saying, because a lot of people think that there's actually a decrease in all of those species, and that's why there's always some bad reputation for hunting and for the wildlife use. So what you're saying is that there's actually an increase, and that's very interesting.
One of the main factors, particularly for Southern Africa, and in our case is Zimbabwe, what we have seen, and is one of the principles of sustainable use, it's working for us. Because why does it work? I'm sure Tinashe touched about the issue about Zimbabwe is very strong in terms of the community conservation paradigm. So we have parks estates, which is about 11% of the about 13% of the country, having wildlife, and then for campfire it's almost 50,000 hectares, which is 50,000 square kilometers, which brings around almost 12 or 13%. So people derive benefit. So if you are able to utilize your wildlife, it means you are going to make sure that it propagates, you keep it. So there is benefit that comes from sustainable utilization, but also because of other diversified land uses like your ecotourism. All these support each other in terms of making sure that people see an economic opportunity for wildlife rather than seeing it as a cost.
Would you say that the sustainable use is equal to the ethical use? Do you think that's the same? So
sustainable use, ethics are part of what we do.
Yes.
Because ethics looks at the moral values and whether we are doing is good or bad. So in terms of sustainable use, we use sustainable use principles. Sustainable use principles, I think we are saying we are deriving maximum benefit today and not depriving the future generation. And many a time, I think as one of our core values and even our mission is to ensure that we are able to sustainably conserve whilst we are benefiting today. So to some extent, it gives an opportunity. Morality in terms of values, I think for Zimbabwe, we pride ourselves in having the best, in terms of moral values, in terms of conservation. We make sure that whatever we do is something which is ethical, but also based on science. And I think that is something which we have anchored us moving forward.
What you were saying is that also like the use of science is, I mean, that is very important. I don't think that it is equal to what we actually think that like the Africans are handling their own animals. We always have the problem in Europe, or we are here in Germany at the moment, that we are trying to tell the countries in Africa how they should handle their wildlife without ever being there. What do you say to that?
So I think the best managers of a resource are those that are within the landscape.
100%.
And in many cases, if I am in Europe or any a space in the world, and I'm looking at Africa, so the values, the management regime, and factors that assist in terms of conservation vary. So I'm sure the perspective which is normally given is that we have globalized the wildlife, and anyone has a say, perhaps through social media, even through their views. But I think us who are on the ground have the overall say and impact in terms of conservation. So to say in terms of wildlife, we know that we are putting resources, we are deriving benefits for us and even the community, so that we input into conservation. So exactly what we mean, us as in this case Africa and Zimbabwe in particular, we are the best managers of the resource because we are putting action, we are deriving the benefits, but we know
you're on the ground.
Doing that, we are also facing a lot of resistance these days because of the ethical concerns, moral values to say don't utilize the wildlife because it's a global good. But what we may need to do is to differentiate, to say those that are bearing the costs, let them have a bigger voice. I think that's where we should be going. And us, we have the evidence to say by managing wildlife in a sustainable and proper way, the results are proving themselves because we are utilizing and getting a return. And just to indicate that our constitution in Zimbabwe is given a provision for sustainable utilization. Be whatever we are utilizing as a natural resource, we need to have principles that are making sure that we don't deprive future generations, which brings the sustainability aspect.
You said don't deprive future generations. How do you say, or what would happen if there would not be any hunting? You said also with the communities and how the community manages wildlife. How does it work? What would happen if we, for example, would decide in Germany right now that you would not be allowed to, for example, export trophies, or actually that hunting should be banned at all and there should only be photo tourism?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So if you look already in terms of hunting or even utilization, what does it do to the population? So in terms of wildlife, Zimbabwe already, as indicated earlier in earlier discussion, we have been able to grow our populations. And when populations grow, then we have the tragedy of human-wildlife conflict.
100%.
Yeah. And people, if they see a cost and not a benefit of any resource that they have, then they are better off with other alternative land use. So for Zimbabwe, basically, what the government has been pushing is to say, let's ensure that those that are living with the resource are able to benefit, but more so that their costs are reduced. And for us, as we look at the future generation, is to say, what actions and practices can we do today that are able to make sure that those that are living with the resource can make sure that they perpetuate whatever they are doing, but more importantly, by ensuring that we know we contribute to the regional programs, this transfrontier conservation and the global conservation frameworks. So we need then to be able to say, whatever we are doing, as we are doing now, it should benefit those that are living with the resource, so that they are not going to kill the animals, they're not going to change land habitats, but they see value and continue making sure wildlife conservation pays for itself, but also support socio-economic development.
Could you do me a favor and tell me how also species that are not being hunted profit from the hunting? I mean, that's probably a very interesting question, because we only talk about hunting, but what is with all the species that are not being hunted?
Very important question. So basically, hunting, occurs mostly in areas that are too remote. It was in Zimbabwe. Let me just give a clear analogy of our Parks estate and even the other hunting areas. So in terms of hunting, it only occurs in safari areas under the Parks and Wildlife Estate. So we have six categories of conservation areas. So we have national parks, no hunting. It's just for conservation of the habitats and the biodiversity which occurs there. We have recreational parks, normally for enjoyment. We have sanctuaries where we would want to propagate some species, botanical gardens and reserves. So hunting only occurs in safari areas. Then on private land, They have game utilization programs and even conservancies, and then on campfire. So if you look broadly in Zimbabwe, not every area is hunted. So when we hunt in areas that we perhaps don't even other economic opportunities like phototourism, ecotourism, among others. So the money proceeds that comes from there goes back to management programs for wildlife. So if we say we are hunting in safari area, how does that benefit national park? How does that benefit even a communal area conservation program? Is that the money that comes goes back into the central budgets, or even it could be those communal or private areas. And when they do law enforcement, the money is coming basically from the money proceeds of hunting. So hunting becomes one revenue stream of us in terms of how we are funded and how we get the budgets going.
And everyone is affected by it. I mean, it's not only the communities; it's also building hospitals. It's building workspaces. It's building even uniforms. Everything comes from it.
Indeed, and in that regard, so what happens in many cases is that we look at. You had asked about the restrictions, or maybe the cost to say don't hunt, don't import trophies. So if we look, just for instance, we had our Zimbabwe biodiversity economy report published last year. So what it did show that prior to COVID, we were generating around $30 million in terms of hunting.
Yes,
that's one revenue stream. Before 2019 COVID period, we generated about 20 million. So already you see in terms of the money, if we say on average 30 million is coming direct from hunting. Yep. And 2 million basically goes to campfire programs. So campfire has been generating around 2 million every year. And so what it means is that you are reducing the cake of conservation. And it means that there is no much investment in law enforcement, there is no investment in research, there is no investment even in other conservation support initiatives, which means that the resource doesn't derive value. For instance, currently Zimbabwe, we have over 100 tons of ivory, that's from elephant.
Yes.
So that's a cost to keep it. So what then do we do with that? We know there are these restrictions that are there, but can we look at innovative funding models to say this product should have a value? Surely we cannot say people have been looking after that resource for years, and now we say it's valueless.
It's a very, very high price. It's still with high value, but the problem is you can't use it.
We can't use it. So I'm sure in terms of us saying we cannot use the resource, what we need then is to say how do we unlock value out of that product for us to be able to continue investing in biodiversity. Because hunting, as we say, it's a tradition, and many over the years we know we evolved from hunter-gatherers, we have modernized, but modernization varies with the landscape. And for Africa, and with the new global biodiversity framework that we are implementing now, we need to showcase that, for instance, Zimbabwe, we have been doing very well in terms of conservation, which is evident. So what then do we do? What lessons can we learn from there? How do we help us? We know now there's innovation in terms of carbon credits, and how can also the biodiversity we have, even elephants, contribute to carbon credit framework?
How would the lift of the ban, or like for ivories, like this, that you are allowed to actually sell ivory, how would it affect you?
So it will unlock the value. As I mentioned, over 100 tons of ivory in Zimbabwe, that's a stockpile. Yes. To keep that stockpile, you need the security, you need to make sure that this is secure. Yep. And more importantly, this ivory stockpile, it's actual ivory, mostly from hunting, it's natural death of elephants. So I'm sure Tinashe mentioned that, ecologically, we need half an elephant, 1 elephant per square kilometer. Mm-hmm. So, when we have climate change coming into picture, we have all these pressures, to do with the animal survival. Animals die naturally. So the bulk of the ivory stockpile is from natural death. So it's not that it's hunting that you say, no, because it's a bed, ivory. This is ivory from natural death. So what we would then need is to say, how do we unlock value? If we unlock the value, where does the money go? I think some of the questions and concerns has been to say there is no accountability of the money. But normally, if it's a wildlife entity, we are audited. These are issues that people can now discuss to say, did the money go back into conservation? Did it go to community development? So I'm sure, as you say, we need just to look at benchmarks and clear, giving people the due respect that if they are doing well, how can we increase and enhance their efforts of doing conservation well?
I have one more very important question. How does the sustainable use of habitat and wildlife actually affect climate change? Because climate change, for example, in Germany is like a very apparent topic. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so in our case, normally climate change, we are looking at the variability, and most to us is the extreme events. So if you look in terms of habitats to us give us safeguards. So if you look in terms of Zimbabwe, as I mentioned, if you say 28% is under conservation, it means we have a natural sink for carbon. More importantly, it also gives us safeguards during extreme events. So if we keep our habitats well, it means that we grow also our wildlife resource. And for instance, elephants has now been recognized that they play a critical role in carbon cycle. Of course, we are not yet getting benefit out of it. So in Africa, we provide the world with an opportunity of carbon stock, which we do through the forest, the natural habitats, natural wood and forest that we have. And more importantly, we know the biodiversity. As men, we are part of nature. We also benefit through the habitats and biodiversity, helping us, be the carbon sinks, but also by buffering, communities and even the nation, from extreme, hazards that will come associated with climate change.
Thank you very much, Edson. I have a question. What would you? I mean, we are here on the last day of the expo, but what would you say? Why hunters or like people from Germany should come to your country? I mean, that's always a nice question to ask.
That's an interesting question. So basically, Zimbabwe, as we've mentioned, we have the big five.
Yes.
So it means if you come to Zimbabwe, you instead of only going to hunt, you also enjoy the natural landscape. So Zimbabwe, we pride ourselves, it's a savanna country, but we also have, Afro-montane habitats. We also have natural wonders, the Vic Falls, you come there, the natural monuments, manapus. We also have the cultural component. So Zimbabwe gives you a variety of, from the weather, your habitats, in terms of biodiversity, your natural landscapes. But more importantly, I think the cultural, aspects are key. So for Germans and Europeans, I think come to Zimbabwe, to be able to, contribute to the conservation dimension in terms of hunting those species that are regulated properly through science. But more importantly, you interface with the Zimbabwean, flair and the Zimbabwean hospitality. By so doing, I'm sure we all, benefit the global biodiversity conservation framework. We also, contribute to sustainable use. And I think we encourage, particularly developed nations to come so that they see firsthand what we are doing. And at times, conservation is not us only doing it, but we also need partners from Germany. Already we are working with some key partners, for instance, the Frankfurt Zoological Society from Germany, supporting us in one of the most, the second largest park in Gonarajo. This is something excellent to us to Zimbabwe. So we look forward to more Germans coming, but more so to showcase the Zimbabwean story so that they can also be ambassadors of sustainable conservation.
100%. I would say we end this topic with hunting is conservation. Would you say that's right?
For us, definitely hunting is a tool that aids sustainable conservation. And we have demonstrated it. All these populations that we have grown over the years are due to the fact that we have put an economic value to our life. And if we are able to do it in a scientific way, in a way that doesn't deplete the population itself, but be able to derive ecological and socio-economic benefits, I think to us, hunting then becomes a major player in terms of sustainable conservation.
Edson, thank you so much for coming today and giving us all these insights. If you want to go to Zimbabwe, I mean, the expo is ending soon, but it's easy to get in contact with those nice guys. And thank you so much for listening.
It was a pleasure, and thanks for having me here.
Thank you.
This sound like Argentina.